Hello guys, Paul from Rogue Aperture here, doing a VFX breakdown from our latest video, which is learning to be fast and furious. If you haven't watched it yet, there's a link in the description down below. Click on it, give it a watch, see what you think. We think it's pretty funny, but we're also really biased, so make up your own mind on that one. But for now, I'm going to show you how I did the car driving over the pothole shot, which is this one here. And also the car erupting fire from its exhaust, which is this one here. Which is actually, if you didn't realise, is fake. It is a VFX shot, because a Nissan Pulsar can't really shoot fire from its exhausts. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to show you how I did those shots. So here we go. So the reason why we did a shot like this is basically, this video is very inspired by Fast and the Furious. Pretty much in every Fast and Furious style video and drag race, there's always like the cool cars and they're erupting fire and it looks fantastic. Really cool build up to a race. We wanted to do a very similar thing, but because the cars that we had were a Kia and a Nissan Pulsar, they're not really high performance cars that will sort of take you to the edge of your seat. So to make them seem a little cooler, and believe me, I stress little, cooler than they actually are, was purely to do a VFX shot. And we thought it would just be very, very, very funny to have a automatic kind of garbage Nissan Pulsar erupting fire from its exhaust. Basically, this effect is purely layers. It's the first thing that I did was just put in a fireball effect from the Action Essentials Video Copilot pack. That effect itself is this guy right here. Play that out. So it's just a cool little fireball from the side. It's got nice range to it. It looks pretty good. So what I did, just adjusted its sort of rotation and its anchor point to make it tack on to where the exhaust was. I just basically threw in a fireball and saw how it looked. And basically, it was that. What I did was each fireball, like exhaust shot, is made up of, I think it's like 7 or 8 layers. 3 of those layers are this exact same fireball effect, but I have duplicated them. I have scaled them differently, and I've also changed their blend mode. So the next one that I put in, that I noticed in some of the Fast and Furious stuff that I was watching, is that when they erupt fire, the fire's coming out blue. So what I did was I duplicated this fireball and then scaled this one down a little bit. But then I set its blend mode, instead of screen like the first one, I set this one to divide. And this is purely just kind of experimenting with all the different blend modes and seeing what they did. But what this one did was it turned it into like kind of a weird blue negative sort of thing, which by itself just looks weird and looks even more weak than the first one. But when combined with this first fireball, you do get that little bit of blue fire, and it sort of, sort of seems a little bit cool. So looking at that, it looked alright, but I thought when you set the effect to screen, you do lose some of its darkness and its sort of full fire color. So if we look at this original effect here, it looks very, very red, very, very fiery, obviously. But getting rid of all the blacks, it does change it. So what I did was I decided I'll make another layer. Again, I adjusted its scale and its anchor point, but I set this blend mode to multiply, and the multiply layer is a really dark one, but this opacity I dropped hard to 47% because I didn't want it to be too full on. I wanted it to be like another little element underneath the fire to sell this effect. So when you combine it with all 3 fireballs, it looks pretty cool, in my opinion. You do get kind of a bit of a layer. The dark underneath it fills the yellows out, and then you got that really cool blue. I rotoed a layer, which is this layer right here. And what I did in this roto layer, purely just went frame by frame and made sure that not only the exhaust tip was tracked, but sort of the length of the exhaust itself, the edge of the muffler, and just a little bit of the under part of the bumper here. And one thing that I noticed that I'd missed, and it was blatantly obvious, was that there's no kind of heat wave, there's no distortion. I decided to sort of make some displacement for it. And how I did that, it's a pretty easy effect when you kind of drill down to it, is what I did is I duplicated all of the fireball effects from sort of the first fireball hit, because it does fire twice. So I duplicated all of those, including the actual video layer itself, and I pre-composed all of those duplicates, and I named it, that was a pre-composition as displacement. So if we go in here, this is what you just saw, it's all those effects. But as you can see, it's a lot more full on because what I've done is I've scaled up all of the effects more than what they are. So if we go back and have a look, a little bit smaller container on the exhaust. I go back to the displacement layer and everything's kind of a little bit more full on because what I was trying to simulate was how the heat displacement and the wobbling effect that it does is bigger than the actual flame itself. And the trick here is you've got to just make sure you mute that video layer because all we want are these fire effects. Now, going back into the composition itself, what I did was I made another adjustment layer and I called it displacement map. And if you have a look at the effects in this displacement map, I dragged in over here the displacement map distort effect, threw it on there, and I played around with sort of the horizontal and the vertical displacement. You can really make this effect go hard, but I didn't want to. I want it to be sort of a subtle thing that you might not notice, but you notice it enough to think that the fire is kind of real. How the original effect was, if we just set this back, throw it on there, it distorts the entire image. So what you need to do is, just in this little source for the displacement map layer, you then want to go back and find your pre-composition displacement thing. And what that does is it just contains that displacement distort effect to our scaled up fire effects. The effect looks good, but it's lacking more of that environmental impact. For a start, it looks like the effect just goes off the screen and it looks a bit silly. And also, there's no real environmental lighting. So, what I did, using the trusty old mask tool, is I've got these two layers up here. Now what this layer is purely a mask. So if we have a look at that mask, so all this mask is a rectangular mask on the portion of the road that I wanted the fire to be erupting on. And I just sort of feathered it a little bit, nothing too drastic. All I wanted was this fire to encounter resistance. The other one was obviously this environment one. Without it off, everything just stays dark. So all this effect is elliptical mask on the ground to light the ground up, another mask on the back of the bumper to light that up, and a little bit around the exhaust. So this spark, all it is a cracker going off, but it creates a nice kind of blue spark right there. You play it out with this spark layer in and with the firecracker layer in. You get like a bang, some sparks on the ground, bang, another hit, and they all just have like an explosion source. And that is basically how I did that effect. A lot of layers for basically 4 seconds, but that's what you do. Moving on to the second effect. This is personally my favorite effect for purely no reason. I just think it's really cool and I'm stoked at how it turned out. The original script, we were trying to figure out a way for one car to be in the lead and then all of a sudden something happens and they're no longer in the lead. And we thought, kids don't really notice potholes and they don't really care. I remember when I was learning and I barely paid attention to potholes. I was just trying to make sure I didn't die. But it's something that the parents obviously worry about because it can do some serious damage to your car. So we figured if the kid was all of a sudden surprised by a pothole out of nowhere, he'll freak out, he'll slam the brakes, he'll sort of move the car in a way that'll slow it down, thus giving the other driver just kind of that story plot of just overtaking it. So to make that effect, I had to kind of composite in a fake pothole. And we'll have a look at how I did that effect. Very, very simple, not a whole lot going on here. We've just got our footage, which is a GoPro. This is the original footage, no modification. What I then got was a pothole. So going into the pothole layer, checking it out. So all I did was just bring in that pothole image, elliptical mask around the pothole itself, feathered it out so you got just enough of the surrounding road. And then once I actually threw that into the shot, I was pretty happy with how it blended. So what I then tried to do, this effect was a little harder than what I was planning it to be. I did a 3D camera track of this GoPro layer, but there wasn't enough detail somehow on the road for there to be any tracking points. So pretty much what I did was hand tracked this pothole and I tracked its anchor point and its scale. So if we have a look at the keyframes here, and what I was just trying to do is use this bit of road work as reference for, how big this pothole was going to be. So as we move along, I'd basically just keyframe nearly every frame. It tracked well, it looked really good. So the next thing I had to do was just obviously roto the car to make this effect real. So if we turn that on, have a look at the roto. So I've just rotoed the wheel, the edge of the frame, and just searched the car, purely just to make sure that this pothole was going under the car. So with the roto and the pothole tracked in, that's the shot. Kind of looks like the car is driving over the pothole. The next thing I had to figure out was to show impact. And how I did the impact is I scaled the image up. So I scaled it to 120%, because what I then did was timed it to when he hit the pothole the first time. And then I adjusted its Y coordinates. I quickly, over like 5 or 6 frames, I bounced it up and down. As we can see, it goes down, then back up, and then down again, and then back up, just kind of show that impact. And that is purely it. That's kind of just how we made it look like there was a very big impact on the car. The only other thing that we had to sell was the actual hit itself. And once again, Action Essentials comes to the rescue. So we used a slam impact from the audio part of some of the Action Essential stuff. And then we had to look at some debris. So that, it kind of sounds like a shock absorber break-in. And then we've got debris metal. This was the main way that this worked, which is when you combine all those elements, it's big enough to sell that effect. And we're actually really happy with how that turned out. So there we go, just a VFX breakdown on how we did a couple of those shots in Learning to be Fast and Furious. And again, if you haven't watched it, click on that link down below, check it out. If you enjoyed this video, or if you enjoyed the main Fast and Furious video, then be sure to subscribe. It helps us out. We also have just a lot of kind of cool videos coming up. We sort of do a video every week with a main big video kind of every month. So if you enjoyed it, then again, please subscribe. And until the next video, have a good day.